Welcome to another live stream edition of the John Keim Report. Appreciate you tuning in. You're watching on YouTube. When you're watching this, you can help us out there by hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe button. You can always find us there later as part of Ampire Media, AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in. You can always read my work on ESPN.com, and you can listen to my partner over here, Bram Weinstein, on ESPN 630, the voice of the Commanders. So let's get started, Bram. A win is a win in this league. It's very hard to win in this league. It was not always pretty, still some holes, but I'm curious what you came away from Sunday's win in Atlanta, what your thoughts were, and how it pertains to this team moving forward.
Real time, I didn't feel totally great about it, other than I agree with you. Just winning is really everything, and that the defense came up huge in critical spots in the second half. But then rewatching it, I know the yardage total won't seem this way, but best defensive plan, best defensive execution since week one, personally, is what I think. And then secondarily, on offense, I still think they're trying to figure out who they are and what they do. I still think they need to run the ball more. I think they need to exert their will more. The fact that Atlanta had 29 more plays than them and dominated time of possession is worrisome. But again, listen, I like the fact that that they came away with a win and the defense came up with critical plays in the second half. And, listen, I'll take it, is the way I'd put it.
Well, and the funny thing is, Brandon, I've gotten a lot of this, like, if they had a better quarterback, well, yeah. I mean, if I was 5 inches taller, I'd be, a different person too. So they don't have a better quarterback. So to me, the plan going in was make Desmond Ridder beat you. I mean, how many times, they don't give you an asterisk next to a win because, Atlanta doesn't have a great quarterback. Atlanta is every bit this team's equal. They have a good defense. They have a really good running game, a good offensive line. So, you still have to make a guy beat you, and that's what they did. So I agree with you on the defensive game plan was good in that. Take away Bijan Robinson and make Desmond Ridder beat you. And they completely took Robinson out of the game.
I mean, not that I'm speaking for Atlanta, but I don't know how they don't watch this and go, how did we end up throwing the ball 47 times? Like they're crazy, honestly, for doing that. So they kind of played into Washington's hands. And I'll go back to, my original kind of takeaway, which I know they gave up a lot of yards. That team does have some very high level first round pick skill position players.
Drake London's really good.
Drake London's, they're going to make plays, so I don't get overly concerned about them. Like the first touchdown they scored, that was an NFL throw, to Kyle Pitts. Like, I'm not going to be upset about that. Kyle Pitts being locked on either Barton or Davis, he's going to win some of those. Like, I'm okay with that. Drake London coming down with a crazy contested catch. I'm okay with that. Like, these are really good players that they played up against. I'm all right with all that. It's the other stuff that was happening for the last 3, 4, 5 weeks that, like, the edge contain was problematic. The line wasn't getting pressure. And in this case, the edge control was far better than it's been. Really, it actually falls right in line with what typically happens previously in the last few seasons under Ron Rivera and Jack Del Rio. The edge contain of the defense seems to kind of hit its stride right about now. And boy, did they need it against this particular team. So I thought Chase Young was more disciplined. I thought Casey Tuhill and James Smith-Williams are always very reliable to make a few plays here or there that kind of can help turn a game or mess up a drive. I thought John Allen was more active than he's been in a few weeks, and I really do feel like the heartbeat of this team is the interior defensive line. And not that they haven't been good, they just haven't been as impactful as I'm used to seeing them the last few weeks. I thought Allen showed up a lot more this week. I thought Cody Barton had a very good game, extremely active.
Barton's best game.
Ball. And, like the reality with the secondary was they did need to give Emanuel Forbes a break, that Danny Johnson is not going to make the type of high-end plays that they hope Forbes will make, but he's steady. And I think it was a security blanket for them, frankly.
Yeah, and I think, and I talked about this on the film review. If people want to know my thoughts on the defense in general, what they showed, I did the film review about why were they so effective stopping the run, and so much of it was about the 5-man front. Like it simplified, it identified their gaps in a better way. And I think that's why you saw the linebackers playing a little bit faster. So I think that was a good thing. You can't use it against every team because not every team presents the same thing. And somebody on here was asking about the 4-3. You're only going to see that, like you were seeing that Sunday, because Atlanta played a lot of 22 personnel. So 2 tight ends, 2 backs, right? Or 21 personnel. So it lent itself to playing a traditional 4-3 look at times, but the 52 was more effective overall. So it gave them a different look. So that's why they were able to do it. But it really kind of simplified that. And the one guy that you didn't mention who needs a big shout out is the big fella in the middle. When you play in that 52, you better have a big guy in the middle, and that's John Ridgway. I thought he was really good too, played with some power, and he gives them that ability to really, I think, muscle some people in that interior. He has been playing pretty well. And so I think that makes a difference too. And so I see.
Why did it take Del Rio so long to realize you force turnovers when you blitz? And I will say this: 2 of the 3 came on very well-timed pressures, which will go back to, I think this really was the best execution plan that they've had. 2 of them were extremely well-timed pressures. Fuller was waiting for it off of a pressure. The interception in the end zone for St. Jude's came at a very well-timed pressure. The third one was really just a great individual play by Jamin Davis. It was maybe that and the forced fumble on Russ. He's had 2 game-changing plays this year in the 6 games and 2 of the 3 wins.
Right.
That was a great, great, great individual play. I mean, they had him lined up on the edge with Bijan Robinson. That's a win for Atlanta 9 times out of 10. Jamin made an outstanding individual play. But the other 2, to go back to the point, was there were 2 pressures. It's not just relying on that front 4. 2 pressures that caused Ritter to throw the ball exactly where the corners were waiting for them, and they took advantage of it. So, I don't know if they ever get too reliant on this front 4 or if they're just reluctant to blitz more. I don't know how you feel about it.
I'll be honest. They blitzed more than people seem to think because they were in the top half of teams in blitzing. In fact, I think I don't know if we have to call up the numbers now, but they were definitely in the top half of blitzes in the league. But when you have those front 4, the whole beauty of it is you should be able to get pressure with them and then play because coaches want to play coverage with 7. When teams are blitzing, it's usually to cover something up. Now, I think where I'd like to see more of is some more like they actually had one stunt that was really good where James Smith-Williams getting home and Ritter gets rid of the ball in 1.6 seconds, which is ridiculous. But what I'd like to see is a little bit more of the overload blitzes where which teams do to them all the time. And, you can rush with 4 and cover with 7, but it's still an aggressive tactic. But yes, I mean, that was the other part when people say, well, they, about Ritter, they forced him into making bad mistakes. And that last one with Davis, what should have happened for Atlanta is that Bijan Robinson, to me, looks like he runs it too vertical. And if you're cutting inside, that's a play. He gave Jamin Davis an opening. Davis pounced on it and made a highly athletic interception. So, I think like that was a really good play by him. But I do think if Bijan Robinson runs the route right, that it's probably, it makes it a lot tougher. And it made it tougher on Ritter for sure. But yeah, the pressure was good. But that's what you do with a quarterback like Desmond Ritter. And it also helped that he's not a guy, I know he ran for 9 or 10 yards, but he's not a guy who's going to hurt you with his legs consistently. So they were able to keep him bottled up and made him throw off his back foot. He doesn't have the greatest arm to do that. And so that's what you do.
Yeah, no, I thought it really was best executed defensive game plan since week 1, frankly. And the fact that they did throw the ball 47 times, that's on them. I have no idea what they were thinking. I mean, the tide had really turned. I think it was more out of attrition in the second half. They had run so many plays that clearly Atlanta was able to move the ball better on the ground. I think just out of attrition for the amount of plays that were being run. But once Ritter threw the ball, they were playing into Washington's hands. So I thought they played pretty well. Other side of the ball, just my general takeaway was I like the design of a number of the plays in the first half. I actually thought they were very creative at times. They have these moments in the red zones, 3rd or 4th time this year when they get in the red zone that EB's really, really throwing everybody for a loop and they get these walking touchdowns. So his design in the red zone so far this year has been very, very good. The only other thing I would, take away from is, again, I know that the numbers ended up being closer to even run pass. The fact that Brian Robinson got 10 carries, 16 over the last 2 weeks, it's just not enough, in my opinion. And the other thing that it's, master of the obvious, Jahan Dotson with 1 target. I know they have a lot of weapons here, and there's always going to be this problem of someone's going to get kind of left out. But he's been targeted like 3 or 4 times in the last 2 weeks. He has a limited amount of receptions and yardage. At some point, they've got to figure out something to get him involved because he's as dangerous a player on the field as anybody that they have, and he just can't be forgotten about. So those 2 things,
I agree.
As they kind of figure this out, incorporating Dotson way more than what they are, which is largely ignored, the last couple of weeks. And I just feel like Robinson has been their best asset. When they get a lead, I want them to go the Atlanta route, start trucking people and get the momentum going their side and wear the other team down. That's kind of a Rivera style, at least in the past. And I think they've shorted Robinson the amount of carries he probably should have had the last couple of weeks.
I will say Sunday, I thought one problem with that was Calais Campbell and Grady Jarrett controlled the middle. And there were times where they had some big problems with those two in the middle. And I think it stuffed some runs, but I agree. Like you need to, that's one of the things with the defense in the second half and all the yards. The offense didn't help them at all. There were 3 really bad series for them that, I think that certainly detracted from what the defense was able to do. So, and I will say this, and we saw Chris Rodriguez get some carries. I like him in this offense. I feel like one of the things that he did, and he only had a couple runs, but he had, I think on the 13-yard run, for example, I think he knows how to set guys up with this and know to run with the level of patience you need and then to cut back. And there was one run he had where he was able to do that, and it was the action of the play was good, and it froze the backside linebacker, but also the action of Rodriguez allows Nick Gates to get to the linebacker, seal him off, and there was a nice little lane for him. So I like what he does in this offense. I'm just curious to see I don't know how many carries he can get going forward, but I do agree with you. There was some more opportunities for that, and Dotson absolutely has to get the ball. Bram, watching that game again, it felt like at times he was a decoy. And then the other problem is there are a lot of times he's running routes that are a little bit deeper, and so by the time he's turning around and might be open, the ball's probably already out. And on Sunday, it was probably going to McLaurin. So there are times where I don't get why they don't try to use him a little bit more, because he's a guy that if you can get him in space, he can do some damage on some of those underneath routes we saw it last year. We saw it against Philly. He needs to be more involved. And it's hard because you say that like, well, they got to get Terry involved. Well, they got to get more runs. They got to do this. You got to stay on the field to get all these guys opportunities, but Dotson definitely has to get more.
Yeah, it's just like I said, we've known this because they have a lot of options, that there's somebody's going to be the person who goes hungry for a couple of weeks because they just don't get the ball that way. And I like when they always say your turn will come. I agree with that, but someone of his level being targeted literally once, doesn't feel right. Off of the week before where he'd been targeted just a couple of times, off of his stats for the year are averaging 2 catches and 27 yards a game. We've got to find a way to unlock him. He's too talented. I guess the point is we got to find a way to get him the ball more. In the same way the first couple of weeks when everybody said you got to throw the ball to Terry, you got to throw the ball to Terry more. Of course, he's your number 1 receiver. So, I think this is all still very much, this offense, very much a work in progress. It can get off, it can get derailed very quickly, dependent on game conditions. We saw this against the Bears where they just didn't run the ball at all for long stretches of time. There's a couple of players that are getting lost in it. Hopefully they'll reemerge. Do they use their best asset, at critical points like Robinson? I would argue no at this point, but they are scoring more points than they did a year ago. Their quarterbacking play is a lot better than it has been in the last couple of years. I think Howes is a very good decision maker. In fact, last week in the late second half was really one of the first times that, in my view, that he actually forced a few throws. I haven't seen him do very much of that. I actually like his decision making, but I think he tried to force a couple to Terry late to try to extend some drives.
That one where he's double covered.
Yes, instead of sticking to what has kind of
Logan underneath.
People are like, why is Logan Thomas getting all the targets? Well, he's reading the play, and that's where the ball's supposed to go. That's what I want my quarterback to do. In this particular case, there was the first time that I saw him, I felt like he forced a couple, which was unusual to see out of him. Largely, I like most of his decision making. Does he hang onto the ball too long sometimes? Yes. Did that attribute to a couple of sacks again? Yes. It's not all on the line. It's a little bit on him as he kind of grows, but largely I like his decision making overall. And so I'm just hoping, so that pushes it back, in my opinion, on EB. How do we unlock Jahan? How do we unlock Deontay? How do we unlock some of the deeper threats on this team? Because we just haven't seen much of it yet. And in the case of Dotson, come on, he's got to get the ball more. He's too dangerous. He's got to get the ball more.
Well, and I would say in Diami's case, they've been going to him a couple of times. He's had a couple of those deep balls, and Against Chicago, it wasn't a good throw. You've got to lead them out there, and he threw it over. You've got to lead them to the open spot. Last week, he had a shot. And, I think with Jahan, people wondered about the drop. It's not like you're not calling – if you're worried about the guys out there and they're dropping the ball, you're not putting them out on the field. It's not about that. It's about creating opportunities for them.
Yes.
And that's what they haven't done for Jahan. And again, I don't want to just – you need to get the ball to Terry. Like, first and foremost, I'm getting the ball to Terry and I'm getting it to him early because I think they operate better when he gets the ball early.
I agree.
But I'm definitely going to get some plays in there for Jahan. And sometimes it's not just calling the play. I'm going to call this play for Jahan because you might call it for somebody think this is a good play for him. And then the coverage shifts. So you might see something. And so that play that you think is designed for him is going somewhere else because of for whatever reason. So the kid is talented. But I do think the other day when I was watching it, there's a lot of times his routes were a little bit deeper than clearly they wanted to get Terry underneath. I also wonder too, like when the Eagles played a lot of zone against them, and I think that suited him well. I think Terry does well against man coverage, and I think that was a big reason for that 11 targets the other day. And you saw that, like he gets off the line a little bit better, a little bit more physical than what Jahan's going to do against that man coverage. And so,
too, you started talking about this early in the spring and the summer. I totally agree with this. Like, I know everybody's really excited about the enemy. I also am excited about what he's going to produce. But like, I think we both agree, and you started harping on this very early. Like, we need to give them time to figure out.
Yes.
So what I want to see is what this offense is in the second half of the season, because right now it does read week to week to week that they're figuring out what they're good at. They're figuring out who they are. We're also dealing with a young quarterback who I actually think has exceeded expectations, frankly. Like, I know the sack numbers are really awful looking, and he does have some picks and all that stuff. But frankly, like, I do, think he's playing very well. It's as good as I could have hoped, honestly, really.
Yeah.
Decision making and his abilities out there. None of this is too big for him. He's extremely accurate in general, which is why I think he forced a couple last week, because it's not like him to force a couple of things, and that's what he did. But I agree with you. Like, we have to be patient, which is why this whole year all along, not that I want to get into ownership or changes or all that stuff, but like this whole year all along, what concerned me about all the changes was we all know what's in the air and we all know what's on the line here. The ground needs to not be shaky for all of this to develop, to allow EB to figure out what they're good at, to allow Hal to mature, to allow the line to figure him out a little bit, to allow the run pass balance to work itself out, to find spaces for all of the playmakers to have their roles. Like, it was just going to take some time. And I feel like this win, to me, I don't care how they got it, is a massive relief, because I was very concerned at if they had
I know you were
2-4, very concerned that we'd start having some haywire, wild west stuff going on out there. It's every man for himself, and people are worried about jobs. And that's why this win and maybe that punt return saved the season now, because they had to calm the waters down, get a win back to 500, and get everybody calmed down again and just kind of stay on the same page.
And while this is a new organization, like the new ownership, it's an organization in transition for that reason. Like, we're not going to move past that until we know what's going on with this group. And so, like, this group, the coaching staff has to win. And if they don't, so that's why I say this is an organization in transition as much as it is. It's not just everything's new. You have new over here as the owner, but you got the old guys, or the old guard, I guess, still having to win to keep their job. So, so that's a big deal. And so I agree with you. Like, if they didn't win that game, you started to worry about like what's going to happen next, because like, the Giants are struggling right now and their offensive line is banged up. We don't know if Daniel Jones is going to play, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we also know how things often go for this team in the Meadowlands. So you could not put yourself in that position. They had to win that game. The other thing I want to go back to, though, Bram, is some of the coverage stuff, because this is something too that this is the area where when Rivera talks about details, this is part of it. Now, to do your job, there's a lot of it's like with the defensive line, you've got to do your job, because they're the bell cows, they're the anchors of this franchise, of this defense especially. but the secondary continues to have coverage mishaps. And there was the one on the 4th and 4 where it looks like it's a cover 0 and you don't have it, not, they're not locked up on guy man, whether it's Cam Curl or was I think Jamin Davis supposed to blitz on the play. I don't know for sure, but there was a mishap. Then you had on the first Kendall Fuller interception, somebody pointed this out to me on Twitter. I'm watching Kendall, I'm watching the pressure, but on the other side, you have 2 receivers versus 1 defensive back. Somebody blitzed on the play that I don't think was supposed to. That stuff can't keep happening. And some of that, maybe some youth, a little bit. Butler's still young. You have Quan Martin out there. But it can't keep happening because when you're going to face a better passing attack, and if they see that, you're going to look for things, right? So that's the stuff that they have to shore up if they want to take that next step or to get back to where they were as a defense at the end of last year.
The other thing too, which was a nice surprise, was I was actually very concerned on punt coverage. Mike Hughes.
Good job there.
Without Holmes and without Reeves, they're 2 gunners and one's a Pro Bowler. And we already know they've had trouble with punt coverage this year. I was really concerned that Atlanta was going to flip the field on a play, even with Hughes, who's not dangerous. Quan Martin, Tariq Castro-Fields, over and over. And then, of course, the Crowder return. To me, really, if this season turns around, that's going to be the play. I mean, frankly, it's going to be the play I'm going to point back to and go, this turned it all around. It was the most important thing that had happened to them in a month.
Since the Jamin Davis strip fumble of Russell Wilson.
Yeah. We wouldn't be saying that had they won the Philadelphia game, but I guess, we'd go back to scoring a touchdown with no time left on the clock to send it to overtime. Had they won the game, I think we'd point to that, but because they've had the 3 straight losses and things were kind of spiraling and the vultures started circling, that Jamison Crowder punt return came right on time for this team in so many ways, and that they cashed it in, never relinquished the lead again. If they turn this around and if they become a playoff team, I'm going to look back at that as the moment where it all changed.
So you're saying that Dax Milne might not get his job back?
I think so.
Doubt it. Listen, it's been fun to have Jamison Crowder back because I always liked him. But the funny thing is, watching him at the end of that return looked a little bit gassed. And he even said after the game that he should have been stretching out on the sidelines a little bit, and it bothered him the whole game that he couldn't finish it off. But they've actually, it was a 20-yard return against the Bears. That was a good return. He had I think a 14-yarder he said against the Eagles that he pointed out, you get 10 yards, that's great as a returner in this league. And so they've been close to a couple of things, but he just does such a good job. And it's funny because when he was here the first time, he had 1 year where he was really good returning punts and a couple of years where he just wasn't very good. But man, he's been really good for them so far. And that's been I think there are a lot of other guys too that contributed. Somebody brought up Danny Johnson. He had a nice game. And this is one play I put up on the film review, Bram, that 4th down, the 1 4th down that he broke up, he plays it textbook. It was inside leverage and Pitts is against him. It's a bigger guy. Danny Johnson is not a big guy, but he plays a perfect leverage, plays inside, knocks the ball away. Ritter, you can say if you have you got to get the ball up there, but man, Johnson was in the right spot, and that's what you need to see.
He's been very steady for them.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go all the way back to last year, but he was the surprise cut of the end of last summer when they
I agree.
Guys who hadn't even
never made sense.
It burned them early in the season by going with some young and experienced guys over a steady player like him, which kind of leads us back to this, which is Emanuel Forbes did not play a defensive snap this past weekend. I was told on Friday, don't expect him to play much. Right. I didn't know it would end up being 0. That's what it ended up being. What do you think? What's his short-term future?
Well, I think short-term, you're going to see until they start to see more what they want to see, consistency with your technique. And so the only way he can show it now is during the week when you're getting reps. But that's been the big bugaboo. So yeah, I would say early last week that probably wasn't going to play because you can't keep making it's not just that you're getting beat. It's why are you giving up those plays? It's because your eyes aren't in the right spot. It's because you're not playing with the technique that they want him to play with. So he's got to learn all that. It will make him better when he gets to that point. And I think they're fortunate that they have Danny Johnson. And the funny thing, Bram, we're talking to Danny Johnson after the game the other day, and Forbes is dressing right next to him.
Yeah.
And it was weird, not weird, because Forbes handled it well. I mean, the kid has handled this well. I think that bodes well for him. And then Danny Johnson sitting there saying, like, yeah, he's going to go back in there. He's going to be ready. He's going to do this. I'm like, you just had this big game for yourself. And when you're talking about how this guy's going to go back in there, I thought it speaks well of Danny Johnson too, that he knows that, the job is to help get this guy ready as well. I think he'll go back in there. I don't know that we'll see him this week. And I don't, then you have Philadelphia the week after. I think if I'm the coaches, you're going to want to see more consistency in using the technique, and letting him do that away from the field is probably a good thing. But the thing that bothers me, Bram, with this is that these were some of the issues that we saw this summer, especially in Baltimore. And that's where you say, like, why wasn't this focused on more, or what, you know what I mean? Why did it get to this point where with the technique? I mean, could you have done something a little bit earlier with the, putting Danny Johnson for him then? I mean, you know what I mean? So that's the thing that I wonder about. But I don't know. When would you put him back in?
I need to talk to the coaches about it. I mean, this is an interesting week. The Giants haven't scored an offensive touchdown in 3 weeks, which is preposterous, but they haven't. They haven't scored an offensive touchdown. They haven't scored a touchdown in the first half of a game. I don't know how they feel about how he's playing, but if there was ever a time to get him back out on the field and try to get some confidence back in him, it's against this particular team. We don't even know who their quarterback's going to be yet this weekend. And I am a sooner rather than later. I think this was a good reset for him. I agree with you. I think he's handled it very well. This is an extremely competent person. And my concern after the Eagles game is his confidence shaken. And then after the Bears game, I got very, very concerned, that's the one thing I don't want to see go away. Welcome to the NFL. Like, you took on AJ Brown, who in my opinion is a top 5 NFL receiver, and DJ Moore, who ranks somewhere and is a clear number 1. You're going to have bad days against people like that. Like, that's going to happen. His days were particularly bad.
Yes.
And that's why I think they had to do what they had to do. But welcome to the NFL. And I'm okay with them giving him the reset. But this is an interesting week. So will they see enough in practice to get his feet wet again on the field? Because that's not AJ Brown or DJ Moore this week. It's not an offense that's functioning even close to anything like that. So I will be curious to see what happens later this week with him.
Me too. And I will say this, the goal here is to win games, not just develop Emanuel Forbes. So if I'm other guys and I'm thinking, like, if I see, like, hey, listen, Danny Johnson just did this and this guy's still not doing that, what are you doing? And the funny thing is, Bram, because his rep, obviously, listen, you don't give, first of all, other cornerbacks have been benched as rookies. Other good cornerbacks as rookies have been benched because it's a difficult position, and they put him in a difficult spot, and and you get baptism by fire, and so you don't. I think the kid can still be good. There's a lot to like about him. I think he has some elite skills and elite traits that will ultimately pay off. It's just that he's got to get there and be more consistent. But I think it's how do you respond and all that. But the funny thing is, here's a guy that they drafted to help get him turnovers. And the one game he doesn't play, they pick it off 3 times. So, and it wasn't because he wasn't out there. It's just coincidence, but it's still.
2 first career receptions. That was St. Juice's first career reception.
Yeah.
That was Jamin's career receptions. That was pretty good.
Yeah. And that, I mean, good for St. Juice too. Like, St. Juice has some tough assignments as well, because he's out there covering Kyle Pitts. He's covering in the slot. He's covering outside. And he covered like Drake London. He has good coverage on the one that London makes a really good catch. Yeah. And, it's funny because Drake London would have been here had he been there at 11 last year, but he wasn't. So he's not, and he never was going to get to that point. But anyway, what are you looking ahead, Bram? So Giants this week, what's your concern? What are your early thoughts on that one?
I mean, the fact that this team lost to an 0-4 team has me counting no chickens about anything, and they played their best game Monday night. So, so maybe they're getting a little bit better, but man, I mean, you just look at how they played, how far they get behind, the metrics on both sides of the ball. I mean, I couldn't even believe I saw this. Kayvon Thibodeau has 4 sacks. They don't have a single other player with more than a half sack. Here's a team that's struggling to keep their quarterback upright. They're losing until Monday night. They're losing by an average of 23 points a game. like this is teed up for them, to get a win and get their 3, but there's nothing that's guaranteed. Like, go look at the results over the weekend.
How does it?
Cleveland with Cleveland with their third string quarterback basically beat the 49ers. The Eagles lost to the Jets. Like, there's Arizona's beaten Dallas this year. Like, we lost to the Bears at home, got smoked by the Bears at home. So there's no gimmies. And we know against this team in particular, with the lone exception of that week 17 game where Joe Judge was going to be fired and they were playing from actually, and were scared to run offensive plays. Every game this team plays against them is close and always seems to take a turn the wrong way when Daniel Jones is playing. And so what am I worried about? I'm worried about all of that. That said, I do assume that if they play with the type of intensity, especially defensively, that they did last week, that they're going to figure out a way to win. That's what my hope is.
Yeah, and they have to, because you need to build momentum. The second half of the schedule is really brutal, so you need to build momentum, and you can't afford to lose these games anymore. And so, this line, and I talked to Jordan Rana on my ESPN counterpart earlier today for the podcast that will be out Thursday about the Giants, and like they are in a state of hurt along that offensive front. And you don't know, is it going to be Tyrod Taylor? The one thing to watch, though, is Tyrod Taylor will go downfield more than Daniel Jones. And so he's going to, I think they'll test this coverage down the field a little bit more. But if he has the time to do so, the real worry for me, Bram, is Wink Martindale. What does he cook up against a young quarterback? That's the big concern for me. And what happens there? Because listen, there have been so many times that you go, like, they play in the Meadowlands, like they're just better than the Giants. And then you pick them and it's like, how did they lose that game? Yeah. Well, it's usually like a crazy play early in the game or some turnover early in the game that just takes whatever momentum they might have. Like last year, they're up, 10-0, and they gave up a big play. I think it was a little bit of a broken play, and that changed the game. The Giants were doing nothing. And so you can't let them get that kind of momentum early. And that's one thing they have to do.
They'll be a desperate team. And, I think Washington needs to play that way too. I mean, frankly, that loss to the Bears, the near miss against the Eagles, they have a hole to climb out of now. They're chasing two teams that are probably going to be playoff teams ahead of them. They need to keep up. This is a must. I mean, these musts for me, they're catching this team at 1-5 and their metrics are awful on both sides of the ball. I mean, they kind of have to win. I hate putting the pressure on it because I agree, like in the end, winning an NFL game is really hard. I don't care how you go about doing it. But this one is set up for them to get to 4-3. And I think we feel
they have to win
a rematch because the Eagles are playing a night game against Miami. I don't know what their record's going to be when they show up here in a couple of weeks. So it should be interesting.
You have that. And then you also, like, this team has New England the week after. This is a chance to build some momentum in a couple of weeks too. So this is a chance to build some momentum. You cannot let these opportunities slip. They already blew one with the Bears. You can't blow another one. And that's why, I think there's a little bugaboo with them with the Giants that you can take care of that by winning. By the way, the other guy I wanted to give a shout out for what he did Sunday was Cornelius Lucas. Yeah. That dude played a clean game. And I think he's exactly what you wanted to back up. And, I think the one thing with him always has been for them, if you wanted to play him full time, I think the feeling is the more he plays, it just maybe gets a little bit more worn down, not because he's out of shape, but because his size, his height and all that. It's one reason why they like him as a backup, but he's a good backup. And he showed that Sunday. He did exactly what they needed him to do in that game.
Yep. And it was a last minute thing, obviously.
Exactly. And so unfortunate thing, but he handled it very well. So
very steady for them as a swing tackle. He's been kind of invaluable for them. And the same way that I would talk about like Smith Williams, Tuhill, they show up when you need them. They just show up when you need them.
It's funny because I think people are starting to notice that Casey Tuhill is actually a good athlete. Well, he's always been, and when you play the way he did it, you see it more, and that's what he had to do. So anyway, Brad, you got any final thoughts?
Well, I'll just give you the last one, since we mentioned Tuhill. Washington had 3 sacks last week, none of them from Chase Young, Montez Sweat, John Allen, or Deron Payne. That's a weird game, John. You never know how these things are going to go.
No, and but I think that D-line, it showed its depth on Sunday, and they need to show up again this particular Sunday because they should dominate this game. and build on that. And so like this team needs to build on a W. I don't care. Like, listen, we already said that it's hard to win the NFL, but some games you need to win. And if you want to do something this year, these are the games that you go win. And so that's why I think every game is a big game. Every game is a measuring stick. And this is another one, but they have to win this game because they have a chance then to gather some momentum. And whether or not they're playing great, the point is to keep stacking W's until you can get to that point. Can they get there? I don't know yet. There's a lot more we need to see. Anyway, Bram, thanks a lot for joining me as always. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Your comments, your questions, always appreciated. I will be back on Thursday with Jordan Ronan who covers the Giants for ESPN, talking about this game. You need to learn about the Giants. Jordan will be there with good information. I'll have some information from the locker room Wednesday. So there you go. That's it, folks. Talk to you next time.